you want me to get the microphone? Because I can't, I don't know what, my throat is really messed up.
Straining.
I don't know what it is. It's like my voice is changing.
Did you see Barbara today?
Yes, I did. We did bingo today. She loved me. It's really funny, we couldn't find. We knew it was going to be bingo this week, and we couldn't find anything. We couldn't find the game. We couldn't find the gifts. And they weren't in their usual place. And coins.
You do
But they had
gambling?
made the floor.
What you doing, gambling?
Yeah, as seniors, but they lived in Florida. Evidently, they moved everything out of cabinets and all that. But they didn't tell us where they moved to. Here we were searching through the church. So made a phone call to everybody, bring me something for bingo. And now we got enough for 3 or 4 times bingo.
Okay, is that better?
Yes,
Maybe too loud, but I can't really adjust it from here.
echo a little bit.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Verse 1 and 2. Let me get it up for these people. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do shew forth themselves in him. Now it kind of starts out in this telling about John the Baptist, or talking about, he's going to talk about it in just a minute, that he's doing miracles, Jesus is, and Herod is getting a little scared that it's actually John the Baptist. He's hearing of these miracles that are happening, and Herod was one that, Herod the Great, his father was the one that had the babies killed when Jesus was born. And so this is Herod Antipas, which is Herod, one of his sons. And he took over not everything that Herod had. He just took over the northern part, kind of the northwestern part of Galilee. Okay? And that was where everything was happening. That's where Capernaum was. That's where the disciples was. That's where Nazareth, Canaan, the miracle of the wine, all that happened. And so when he did that, Herod got scared, because we don't know that, but he's getting ready to tell us, Matthew's getting ready to tell us that John the Baptist has been killed. Okay, we haven't learned that yet, but that's what he's getting ready to tell us.
You know, I thought the one part that we're talking about, one of the old time writers said maybe Jesus and John might looked
alike. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's they were cousins.
They were cousins, and I'm sure they did look somewhat alike back then. That writer, the Christian writer, Origen, he was, or however you pronounce his name, he was born about 185 AD, so about 85 years after John the Baptist died. So he was close. I mean, a lot closer than we are to him. So he very well may have. And he was taught by some, I think Ignatius, which was a follower or a disciple of John, the Revelator. So he may have got a lot of this information from John. We don't know. From him, I think it was Ignatius. I may be wrong on that, but or Polycarp. I get my names mixed up in there. Sorry, I'm not a historian very much, but so it goes on. In verses 3 through 12, it tells us the story of John the Baptist and what happened to him. You want to read that, Brother Epperson?
For Herod had laid hold on John, bound him, and put him in prison for Herod's sake, his brother's Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It was not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. And when Herod's birthday was kept, and the daughter of Herodias danced before them, and pleased Herod, whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she said, being before instructed of her mother, said, give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake. And then them which sat around him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. He sent and beheaded John into prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it, and told Jesus.
Okay. So we see John had been in the prison, they said, about a year and a half, okay, during this time. That's why he got a little despaired early on. We read another chapter where John sent some of his disciples asking him if you are the one, the Messiah. And I think, as we said at that time, I think it's more, not so much for John's sake, but for his disciples' sake, because John had I think by that time, he pretty much thought that he wasn't ever going to get out of jail. Because one, he hadn't changed his story, and he kept harping on Herod about having his brother's wife. Now, how is that possible? It said Herod had laid hold of John, bound him, put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. So Herodias was married to Philip. Philip is Herod's brother, okay? And Herod had a wife. It was the daughter of the king to the north. I don't remember if it was Syria. Artaeus, I think was her name. So he divorced her. Well, that got the king upset to the north because he divorced his wife, and then he took Herod's wife, seduced her to come over to him. And this daughter, Herodias' daughter, was Philip's daughter, but she came to live with Herod. Okay? And we don't know exactly what was going on behind, but it said Herod had a birthday, and because of that, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Now, most likely, this was it says daughter, but she was probably older, 18, 20, something like that. Maybe not, maybe 14 to 18, somewhere in that ballpark. And it was probably a very seductive dance, I'm sure. Probably got all the people upset, or, excited and everything in there. So he promised her, because she danced so well, he promised her that whatever she would ask, that he would give it to her. Well, they kind of played this into part, evidently, her mom, because her mom was the one mainly that was upset. Herodias was upset because she didn't have John. Herod liked John. He didn't like it because he kept harping on him, but he knew he was a man of God, and he would, he knew that he probably shouldn't kill him. I'm saying that that's what I get out of the story. But when he asked for that, when the daughter asked for the head of John the Baptist on the charger, he kind of knew probably her mother put him up to it. And because he was drunk, I'm sure it was his birthday party, and everybody was drunk, and he had a whole bunch of people in there, and he didn't want to lose face and tell her no. He went ahead and had John the Baptist killed. So right then, he went ahead and sent the executioner down into prison, chopped his head off, and brought John's head up and gave it to the daughter, and she gave it to her mom. Set it on the table. When his disciples, and it's talking about his disciples, I think it's John's disciples, heard about it, they came and they gave the the body to the disciples, and they went and buried it. And then the disciples, John's disciples, went and told Jesus. So they're he didn't kill John at first because he said he feared the multitude. Most of the people thought John the Baptist was a prophet, like he was, and they feared him. Now, up until this time, John hadn't done any miracles that we know of. Nothing's recorded. So the only reason why he could have thought, I think, is because he may have looked like John the Baptist, like you said, Jesus did. He was doing things that he had heard, and John the Baptist, that would have been something like John the Baptist would have done. He was guessing, I guess. Here in the middle of page 3, it says the daughter is described as a girl. This doesn't mean she was a cute little girl. Girl is a term that can be used those of marriageable age. So, like I said, it says she was at least a teenager. And then it says down at the bottom, she had already been kind of prompted by her mother to ask for the John's head on a platter. And it did say that Herod was sorry. He wished he couldn't have done that. He didn't want to do it. But because he didn't want to lose face, and he made a rash promise, since in itself, the promise was in itself null and void, because no man has a right to promise to do wrong. Charles Spurgeon said, like most weak men, Herod feared to be thought of as weak. That's what Carson said. Yeah, it's dead.
It don't work.
It's not working. So it says here at the bottom, Herod had a terrible end. In the order to take his brother's wife Herodias, he first put away his first wife, a princess from a neighboring kingdom. Her father was offended and came against Herod with an army, defeating him in battle. Then his other brother, Agrippa, accused him of treason against Rome, and he was banished into the distant Roman province of Gaul, which we now know as France. Herod and Herodias committed suicide while they were in Gaul. So because of that, they suffered, much like Jezebel and Ahab, the way they suffered.
I think Herod did that because he really felt guilty. He didn't want to.
He didn't want to,
He
but
had to do it.
he didn't want to because he knew he was from God.
Yeah,
He was
Herod
enough.
felt guilty, so he did the same death himself.
Evidently. He kind of lost all hope after you lose out. You don't have, you go from having people to wait on you and the staff and everything like that to where they may have been even in prison. I don't know. When they said they were exiled to Gaul. Okay, let's go to the next one. 13. You want to read that for us, Iris?
When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart, and when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities.
Okay. So, when the disciples, they went to go tell Jesus, and when they told him, and he heard about it, he wanted to go be by himself. So again, he entered into a ship and went out into the desert. Now, Israel's long and skinny. Okay? You got mountains right up against the Mediterranean Sea, not mountains, but big hills, and the northern part is hilly. And right in the middle at the top is Galilee, and that's where the lake is, Sea of Galilee, and all that's low. It's not, the hill country's up high. And then you go over the Jordan River, And everything kind of on that side and down south, that's the desert, the southern portion of Galilee and further south. That's what you would consider desert or deserted. It may not be actually a desert, but it's deserted. There's not, even today, there's not that many people there. When we were there looking across the Sea of Galilee, we went out on the Sea of Galilee. We looked back and you could see, we came out of Tiberias, and you could see Capernaum up there to the north. But over that west side, which is Jordan, the country of Jordan, there was a few little cities or little bitty placements and stuff, but not a lot. I'm sure there's probably more than, we was a ways away from it, but anyway, he went over that way, went east. It doesn't say that, but that's where the desert was. So he went a place apart. But the people, they heard that and they followed him on foot. So they went around the top part of the Galilee, or however it was, wherever they were at, and went on to see where Jesus was. They followed him because they wanted, one, to hear more of his messages and more people to be healed. They brought more people to be healed of him. Okay, 14 through 16, Bertha.
And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, This is a desert place, and time is now past. Send the multitude away. They may go into the villages and buy themselves
Victuals, if you want to say it that way. It's victuals, but go buy them something.
But Jesus said to them, They need not depart, give you them to eat.
Okay? So this is going to be another feeding of the multitude, okay? Here Jesus is testing his disciples a little bit. It's getting late in the day. They've been there a while, and he's been healing for a while. And it's starting to get dark. And he wanted, the disciples said, why don't you let the people go so they can go into the different villages and buy and get something to eat. Now, he knew that they couldn't do anything. The disciples couldn't do anything. But he still said, give ye them to eat. You guys give them something to eat. What would you do? Well, I'd start pulling out my pocket and say, I ain't got that much money. And here in a minute, we'll see how many people there were. But so by doing this, Jesus challenged both their compassion and their faith. Jesus did this because when he got off the boat, the people had already come around, and it was probably more than what he had left. And they'd already knew where he was heading to, so he had compassion for them, and he started teaching them there again. And like I said, they gave him, and he wanted to teach the disciples. The disciples said, hurry, send them away. They're not our problem, even though he'd already fed 5,000. Okay, they'd already gone through that.
They came deliberately to see Jesus.
They did come to see Jesus, but they also wanted, the disciples.
Oh.
When you see, what if, okay, comparatively, we got 4 people here. What if 1,000 people come in here? It'd be hard to
All
say.
we can do is our best.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be a whole lot, would it?
Yeah.
In ourselves. But Jesus was testing them, wanting them to see what he had to bring it to him to take care of it. So they told them, give them something to eat. If they remembered, the wine in Cana, he took care of all that, something to drink. And if he remembered feeding the 5,000, they would have, done something like that.
But to him, it wasn't anything huge. It was
No, because of their compassion, he was wanting to show them some favor.
and show that they'd be done, no matter what the multitude was.
Spurgeon used the words, they do not need to go away. as the basis of a whole sermon that he did. The theme of the sermon was that if there was no need for these mostly casual hearers of Jesus to depart, there is even less reason for the follower of Jesus to go away from continual communion and fellowship with Jesus. So it's telling us that we need to be in contact with him always. Circumstances don't need to make you go away. You won't have hard things so hard or easy that you don't need Jesus. It's not an easy walk. None of the disciples had an easy walk. Every one of them was tortured or somehow abused. They were persecuted, and every one of them died except John the Baptist, not John the Baptist, John the Revelator. John, he died a natural death after he was boiled in oil.
Yeah.
I mean, he was still boiled in oil. So, okay, let's 17 through 19. And they say unto him, We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, Then bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed, and brake, and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. So again, he told the disciples, what do you have? Bring me what you have. And at that particular time, they had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So he said, okay, we can work with that. And he brought them there. Now the disciples wasn't the ones multiplying. Jesus was. But the disciples was the one handing them out. And here again, he gave to them, and they just kept giving and giving, and probably coming back and getting more.
Can you imagine all these baskets when the one you think went about empty fills up again instantly?
It's kind of like the widow. Kind of like the widow that had the cruse of oil that never emptied. So he blessed and gave it, and then 20 and 21, Brother Epperson. It's on page 8.
And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they had eaten, there were about 5,000 men beside women and children.
Okay. So this here, 5,000 men, besides men, women, and children. They said it could have been twice as much, 10,000 people, or even as much as 20,000 with the children that was with them, you know. So can you imagine that, feeding 20,000 people, 15 to 20,000 people? That would be like our tabernacle down there had 10,000. And whenever they released us to lunch, Cleveland was inundated. If you didn't go back to the house and eat a sandwich like a lot of us did. But they went, so here he's telling them, he blessed them, to do this, he blessed it, and then he gave the loaves to the disciples. And the disciples, he couldn't even give a loaf to a disciple because he had more disciples than loaves. So when he blessed it, I'm sure he started breaking it, and it just started, he'd break it, give it to one, break it, give it to the other. And I don't know how they did it. If they took the break and they'd break it and give it to them, and then it's a whole loaf again, and break it again, and break it. I don't know.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know how it took place. But they had 12 baskets full when they brought it together. And he asked them, he didn't want it to go to waste, so they gathered up those extra baskets so they wouldn't have, so they wouldn't lose it.
Waste not one.
It's recorded in all 4 Gospels too.
It is. This is one of the stories that's recorded in each of the Gospels. There's not too many. Usually Matthew and Luke go pretty well together, and Mark. but in this case, all of them has this story. It says it shows that Jesus could feed the people of God even as Israel was fed in the wilderness. Moses had on his hand a couple of million people to feed. As they came out of Egypt, that's what we talked about back there in Exodus, he could have had up to 2 million people maybe following him or more. We don't know how many he had. And God took care of them. There was a common expectation that the Messiah would restore the provision of manna, and this adds to the messianic credentials of Jesus. So if you go and look back how Jesus is greater than Moses, which a lot of the Paul and some of the writers afterwards, that's what they're trying to show. Moses did this, but Jesus did this. Matched almost, and he did it in such a different way. It also shows that Jesus had compassion and care for the people of God, even when he might have been expected his patience would be exhausted. It shows that Jesus chose to work through the hands of the disciples, even when it was not essential to the immediate result. God just said, go out there and gather the food yourselves. But he gave it to his disciples to go give to the people. It shows a preview example of the great messianic banquet that the Messiah will enjoy with his people in the end time. Okay? The three principles that we get from this is we need to thank God for and wisely use what we have. Whatever we have, we need to use it wisely. We need to trust God's unlimited resources. Don't waste what he gives you. He gives us so much. And a lot of times we just kind of waste it. We don't. We get in a way, oh yeah, I can buy that. In our society today, it's what do they call it, a throwaway society. You buy something and it comes in cardboard package or a paper bag, or you buy new batteries and throw them away. And, I can remember Dad and Darla's dad still, they'll use something 4 or 5 times before they throw it away. She will rinse out those gallon Ziploc bags, hang them up to dry and let them dry and use them again. I mean, that's just, we need to make use of what we have because we have it. I mean, I went to the store, it's been probably 2 or 3 months ago now, and this kid, he was double bagging everything at Walmart. And I just looked at him, I said, okay, there's more trash sacks for me. And he goes, what? I said, I use those for trash sacks. He said, okay, that's fine. He said, that's too much trouble. I just go buy some. And I said, well, I got a whole bag of them underneath the sink that I use them over and over again, but just in case something comes along. They talk about reusing them, I reuse them. So. Okay, then we shift down to where Jesus is tired and he sends his disciples on to the next place, and he's going to go up to pray. So 22 through 24, Iris, you read that?
And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary.
Okay. Now this is where he goes up and up on the side of the hill. It's, there it would be a mountain. You have to walk up it and it would be high. It would be a mountain. It'd feel like a mountain to what we would say. But he went up there to pray, and he could see the disciples out there. It's starting, it's dark and everything, and he could see them struggling. And that wind, when it starts up down there, they said it really gets going. And you don't know, it's calm, but it comes, like I said, comes off the Mediterranean or comes off the other way. Either way, there's kind of hills or mountain ranges And boy, that storm comes across and you don't see it. And as soon as it hits there, it just dumps down. The Sea of Galilee, I've told you this before, but the Sea of Galilee is like 600 or 700 feet below sea level.
Wow.
So you got a lot of area. Those mountains are higher than the sea level. So it's coming down, and it's, I don't know how much, 1,000 feet maybe, that it's dropping real quick. You have that cold air coming, it just whoosh, and it just goes across that lake. Really stirs up some storms. We see that quite a bit here in our midsection here. We see those, you know, when the cold front comes through and the hot air gets on top of it, or the cold air goes down, tries to go through it, makes the tornadoes. So it was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Basically, the guys was rowing and they wasn't making any headway. They were trying to get to where Jesus had told them to go, but they weren't there. They were just, I don't know how far off. One of the commentaries said they were just a few, I don't know what they used, furlongs or whatever it was out. It wasn't very far, a couple thousand feet, you know, away from the bank, but they wasn't set in the middle, but it's enough where they can't go against the sea there. So 25 through 27, you want to read that for us, Bertha?
And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid.
Okay. So this is another instance where Jesus was doing something that nobody would expect him to do. He was walking on the water. He was going across it. And if you go back, and I think it's in Luke's commentary, no, Mark says that he came to the disciples when the boat was in the sea after they had exhausted themselves by rowing. And another, I think Luke may say that he was going to pass by them. But they saw him and they cried out because they were just exhausted. These were fishermen that were used to getting out in the ocean, on the sea in Galilee, and to fish that place.
But they were afraid.
They were afraid. Here again, they were fishermen. They've experienced storms before, but this was almost a supernatural storm or something. They wasn't making any headway, and they were trying to go the direction that Jesus wanted, but they wasn't making any headway at all. Kind of hard to have good cheer when you're out there like that, isn't it? But Jesus told them, be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. So they could have just listened to that and had their faith extended and went on, but they didn't, and they were still, Jesus had to go to them. And because of that, Peter is going to get ready to do his. 28, 33. And Peter answered and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. So Peter instead of, sometimes I don't know what to think about Peter. Sometimes he's real strong, and sometimes he's not. Here he said, if that's really you, because he's still, in my mind, that's saying, if you're not a ghost, then let me come out there with you. And Jesus said, come on, you know. And he did evidently walk a little bit. Said he walked out onto the water to go to Jesus, but then what happened?
He looked down.
He got his eyes off of Jesus. Said he saw the winds was boisterous, and he was afraid. So we can't take our eyes off of Jesus. We need to keep focused. That's our whole goal. Keep our eyes focused on him. How do we do that today? Got to stay in the Word. Got to pray. We got to do all the things that we know to do to keep our eyes on him. And because of that, then we still have times. Each one of these. Elijah, he had desperate times. He was up on the mountain taking care of all the prophets of Baal, and then he was hiding in a cave, you know, because Jezebel was sent all the people after him. And he was despairing for that. God told him, what are you doing in the cave here? So he got depressed. He got you know, out of the way. God had to talk to him a while and say, hey, get going. You've got a job to do.
Well, this whole chapter gives us such insight, not only to Jesus. I was thinking a while ago, okay, he's tired. He loses his cousin. Not only did he lose his cousin, he cut his head off.
That's right.
I mean, and then, and so then the Lord leads him out of there, and he thinks he's going to get away to rest. Next thing you know, he's just inundated with people. He starts healing the sick.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to tell you something.
Already.
He's man, okay?
Yeah.
And ministry is work.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, and then even the disciples, he told them to go to the other side.
Right.
They had so many chances to show their faith. It's just the word, like you said, to read it and see they're people just like us. They and even Jesus, he was that perfect sacrifice. Yet he, you know, there's hope for us.
There is. There is. We can see that in the writings of the apostles when they wrote about him, in Matthew here, and Mark and Luke and John and all those. They're writing about what they saw, and they saw a man. But they also, here again, when the ship came to shore and the wind stopped and everything, the miracle of fishes, the miracle of wine, all these things, they're saying, thou art the Son of God. We still haven't got to the point where Peter says, you are the Son of God, you know. But that's coming in a couple weeks, a couple more weeks. We'll see that. And I don't know if all the disciples hadn't come to this reason yet. They're still blowing their mind by what he's doing. And they're still kind of like, wow, how in the world, you know, if you're not the Messiah, I don't know who's going to be, because you're doing all these things. Okay? Let's go on to 34, page 14. Brother Emerson.
And when they were gone over, they came into the land of Shur. How you say that?
Gennesaret. Close enough.
And when the men of that place had knowledge of him, they sent out into all the country round about and brought unto him all that were diseased, and besought him that they might not only touch the hem of his garment, as many as touched were made perfectly whole.
Okay. So we see in the later on where Peter's shadow was cast and people cut, and we saw Jesus where the lady with the
Issue of blood.
issue of blood touched here's another case where all they had to do was touch the hem of his garment, and they were so, he was so tired. You know, he was praying for the people, but if they would just go by him, and people were taking their turns, just going by him and touching his garment, he brought unto him all that were diseased. Everybody that they could, they brought by there. You know, they were telling everybody, what if somebody's doing that today? And the hospital's cleaned out. You'd have people coming from hospitals everywhere in the nation, lining up, wanting to, come and see what's happening. And that's what was happening there with Jesus. It's just the communication's a little faster today than it is then. But as many as touched were made perfectly whole. So whatever they had, whatever disease, whatever ailment, whatever impediment, they were made whole. So one of these things, I thought it was at the bottom of 14, I thought it was interesting. It tells a little bit more about the Pharisees. It said the stricter group, such as the Pharisees and the Essenes, counted it an abomination to rub shoulders in a crowd. One never knew what ceremonial uncleanness one might contact. If they touched somebody that was unclean, they become unclean. And they didn't want to have to go through that. They have to go sacrifice and do all this stuff again, and they didn't want to do that. Jesus is there and said, come here. Everybody just touch me. Come by and touch. So that's just showing you how far away they were from what God wanted to do to the people. Comments, questions? Kind of short tonight, but it's all right. Good short sermon. We'll see everybody Sunday.